was amusing to most people, and you could do jokes about it. I stopped doing jokes immediately as soon as people found out that he was an alcoholic.
Welcome to Johnny Carson Files. On this video, Johnny Carson is about to introduce one of his oldest friends on live television. What Tim Conway whispers into the microphone in that moment will make Johnny collapse forward, his face buried in his hands, shoulders shaking as he struggles to breathe. For the first time in 23 years of hosting The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson cannot speak. The reason behind that moment traces back decades to something Johnny once did and completely forgot about, something that quietly saved Tim Conway's life. What happens next is almost impossible to believe. But before we begin, a quick note. I often see comments from viewers who realize they weren't actually subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy these stories, please take a second to check and make sure you are subscribed. It's completely free, and it helps the channel grow so we can keep bringing you more stories like this.
And I had emotional problems, and in fact, was dependent on alcohol. Then I think that would be a cheap shot to take.
Thank you for being part of the journey. When Tim Conway stepped out from behind the curtain on The Tonight Show stage on March 7th, 1978, the studio audience exploded. Nearly 300 people rose to their feet, cheering and laughing before he even said a word. That was the magic of Tim Conway. He never simply walked onto a stage. He shuffled, stumbled, and sometimes even bumped into the curtain on his way out, already turning the moment into comedy. By the time he reached Johnny Carson's desk, the audience was gasping with laughter. Johnny stood smiling wide, extending his hand. Tim shook it. Then he leaned toward the microphone and whispered something so quietly that almost no one heard it. 3 words. Johnny's smile vanished instantly. His hand dropped. The color drained from his face. For the next 47 seconds, an eternity on live television, Johnny Carson said absolutely nothing. The king of late night, the man famous for his composure, sat frozen. The orchestra stopped playing. Ed McMahon half rose from his chair, confused and concerned. In the control room, producers shouted through their headsets. Something was clearly wrong, but no one understood what had just happened. Because no one in that studio, not the audience, not the producers, not even Ed McMahon, knew what Tim Conway had whispered. No one knew about the night in 1963 that had bound these 2 men together in silence for 15 years. And no one knew that Johnny Carson was the reason Tim Conway was still alive to stand on that stage at all. The story began on the worst night of Tim Conway's life, March 1963, Cleveland, Ohio. Timothy Daniel Conway was 29 years old, and on the surface, everything seemed to be going right. He had just landed a supporting role on the television series McHale's Navy, his first real break after years of grinding through local television in Cleveland. The paychecks were finally arriving. His name was starting to appear in industry publications, and people had begun recognizing him on the street. But behind the closed door of his small apartment on Euclid Avenue, a very different reality was unfolding. His marriage was beginning to fracture under the pressure of sudden change and uncertainty. Tim had grown up in a world of strict expectations where men were taught never to show weakness. Feelings were buried, problems handled in silence. Tim Conway spent his days performing joy for everyone around him, colleagues, producers, and the audiences who watched him on television. He made people laugh effortlessly. But inside, something was quietly slipping into darkness. There was only one small ritual that kept him anchored during those difficult months.
To still do jokes about it, so I immediately ceased doing jokes about that because it was really unfair.
Every weekday night, Tim turned on The Tonight Show. He didn't watch it simply for entertainment or out of habit. He watched because Johnny Carson made the world feel lighter. Johnny's timing, his warmth, the way he could make any guest feel welcome and understood, it fascinated Tim. He studied it carefully, the way a drowning man studies the shoreline. Carson's humor carried a kind of calm that made the chaos of life seem manageable, even if only for an hour. But one night in the late summer of 1963, even that comfort nearly wasn't enough. Tim sat alone in his apartment while the television screen cast a faint blue glow across the room. Earlier that evening, he had made a decision, one he would never speak about for the next 15 years. He believed he had reached the end. Tim wrote 2 letters, carefully folded them, placed them on the kitchen table. When he finished, the silence in the apartment became unbearable, so he turned on the television one last time, not really caring what was on. The Tonight Show happened to be airing. Johnny Carson was already deep into his monologue, describing a chaotic Midwestern state fair where everything that could go wrong somehow did. The audience roared with laughter as Johnny calmly added detail after detail, each one making the story more ridiculous than the last. Then the entire joke collapsed into perfect absurdity, and Tim Conway, sitting alone in his apartment with 2 folded letters waiting on the kitchen table, burst out laughing. He laughed so hard he slid off the couch and landed on the floor. Tears ran down his face as the laughter kept coming, wave after wave. When it finally faded, Tim lay there quietly, staring up at the ceiling. After a long moment, he stood up, walked to the kitchen table, picked up the letters, and slowly tore them in half, then into quarters. He threw the pieces away. For 15 years, he never told anyone what had happened that night. But the story was not over. In fact, it was only beginning. Because on March 7th, 1978, Tim Conway didn't come to The Tonight Show just to be funny. He came to tell the truth. That afternoon at NBC Studios in Burbank, the show was scheduled to tape at 5:30 p.m. for its late-night broadcast. Tim arrived early, 4:40 p.m., nearly an hour before his call time. The makeup artist noticed. The stage manager noticed. Ed McMahon noticed too.
I don't handle it well. You and McMahon? Really you don't? I don't handle alcohol well at all, no.
Tim sat quietly in the green room, holding a cup of coffee he never drank. In his hands was a small, crumpled, yellowed piece of paper he had kept hidden in the back of a desk drawer for 15 years. At 5:10 p.m., Tim walked down the hallway to Johnny Carson's dressing room and knocked twice. Johnny opened the door, looked at Tim's face, and immediately stepped aside without saying a word. They talked privately for 18 minutes. Twice, the stage manager knocked, reminding them the show was about to begin. Both times, Johnny answered through the door with the same unusual request. "Give us a minute." No one on the crew had ever heard Johnny Carson ask for extra time before a show. Not once in 15 years. Producer Fred Dova watched the 2 men walk out of Johnny Carson's dressing room and felt a strange sense of unease. He had spent 3 decades working in television and thought he had seen every possible backstage moment, but this was different. "I looked at both of them," he would later recall, "and I thought, something just happened in that room that I will never fully understand." At exactly 5:30 p.m., the show began. Johnny stepped out and delivered his monologue with the same polished rhythm America had watched for years. The jokes landed perfectly. The audience laughed exactly where they were supposed to. From the outside, everything looked normal. But Ed McMahon, sitting beside Johnny for the 15th year in a row, knew Carson better than almost anyone alive. And he could tell immediately that something was off. Johnny kept glancing toward the wings. His right hand, resting on the desk, wasn't completely still. It tapped lightly, almost nervously, something Ed had never seen before. During the first commercial break, Ed leaned closer. "Johnny, you all right?" Johnny paused before answering. His voice was calm, but there was something unusual in it. "In about 20 minutes, Ed, something's going to happen on this stage that's never happened before." Ed frowned slightly. "I just need you to let it happen," Johnny continued. "Don't cut to commercial. Don't interrupt. Just let it happen." Ed started to ask why. Johnny looked at him and said quietly, "Trust me." Before Ed could respond, the floor manager signaled. The cameras were live again. At 6:08 p.m., Ed McMahon's booming voice filled the studio. Ladies and gentlemen, you know him from McHale's Navy, from The Carol Burnett Show, and from every variety program brave enough to put him near a camera. Please welcome the funniest man on television, Tim Conway. The audience exploded with applause. Tim shuffled out from behind the curtain, immediately bumping into a set piece near the entrance. He staggered backward, stared at it with exaggerated betrayal, and the crowd erupted with laughter before he had even reached Johnny's desk. That was classic Tim Conway. He finally made it to the chair. Johnny stood, smiling warmly, and the two men shook hands before Tim sat down. Tim looked out at the audience with that familiar expression, the one that made it seem as if he wasn't entirely sure how he had ended up on that stage in the first place. The crowd laughed at the look alone. Johnny leaned forward, still smiling. "Tim, it's great to have you here." Tim nodded once. Then he leaned toward the microphone, and he said three quiet words. "Johnny, thank you." There was no setup, no joke waiting behind it, no punchline hiding in the delivery. Just three simple words spoken with a sincerity so unlike Tim Conway's usual comedic persona that it took the audience a moment to realize something had shifted. Johnny heard them clearly, and Johnny Carson went completely still. For 47 seconds, the studio sat in silence. The orchestra stopped playing. Ed McMahon slowly rose halfway from his chair, unsure what was happening. In the control room, producers spoke urgently into their headsets. 300 people in the audience sat frozen, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Johnny's head slowly lowered. His hands pressed flat against the desk. His shoulders began to shake. Camera operator Dale Hutchins, who had filmed The Tonight Show for 11 years, later said he zoomed in on Johnny's face purely on instinct. No one had asked him to do it. Something just told him to. Through the camera lens, he saw something he had never seen before. Johnny Carson was crying. Not the controlled emotion viewers occasionally saw during serious interviews, not the dignified glimmer that came when something touching happened. This was different. Johnny's face was lowered. One hand covered his mouth. His shoulders shook the way a person's shoulders shake when they've been holding something inside for a very long time. Across from him, Tim Conway didn't try to make a joke. He didn't break the moment. He simply sat there quietly waiting, his own eyes beginning to fill with tears. Finally, Johnny Carson lifted his head. He looked at Tim, then at the camera, then at the hundreds of silent faces in the studio audience. "I'm sorry. Give me just a second," Johnny Carson said softly into the microphone. I wasn't ready." The audience waited in complete silence. Johnny reached beneath the desk and pulled out a glass of water. He took a slow sip, buying himself a few precious seconds to steady his emotions and gather his composure. Everyone in the studio could feel that something deeply personal was unfolding, something far beyond the usual rhythm of a late-night interview. When Johnny finally looked back up at Tim Conway, his expression had changed. It wasn't the polished warmth he showed every guest. It was something far rarer, the look one old friend gives another after realizing they've just received something unexpected and profoundly meaningful. "Tim," Johnny said, his voice calmer now, but noticeably different from his usual tone, "do you want to tell them why you're thanking me?" Tim Conway glanced out at the audience, then at the camera. Finally, he turned back to Johnny. He took a deep breath, and the sound carried through the microphone. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for 15 years, Tim said quietly, "so I'm just going to say it." The studio grew even quieter. The funniest man on television was not telling a joke. And somehow that silence was more powerful than any punchline he had ever delivered. "In 1963, Tim continued, I was in a very dark place. I mean that literally. I was sitting in my apartment with the lights off, and I had made a decision that I wasn't going to see the next morning." A collective breath moved through the audience. "I turned the television on," Tim said. "I don't even know why. And Johnny was on. He was doing this bit about a state fair. I don't even remember the details anymore. But I laughed so hard." Tim paused, gripping the crumpled yellow piece of paper in his hands. "I laughed so hard I fell off my couch," he said softly. "I couldn't even breathe." For a moment he looked down, gathering himself. And lying there on the floor, I thought, if the world still has moments like that in it, then maybe I want to see what the next one is. Tim lifted his eyes and looked directly at Johnny. "You didn't know you were doing it," he said. "You were just doing your job. But I was the audience that night." He paused. "And your job saved my life." No one applauded. Not right away. 300 people sat perfectly still, wrapped in the kind of silence that fills a room when something deeply true has just been spoken. The kind of silence where even breathing feels louder. Johnny Carson looked down at the desk in front of him. His jaw tightened, and his eyes closed briefly as he absorbed what Tim had said. When he opened them again, he turned fully toward Tim. "I need to tell you something," Johnny said quietly. "And I need to say it here, in front of everyone, because that's the only way it means what it should mean." He paused for a moment. "I know exactly which bit you're talking about." Tim blinked in surprise. "The State Fair piece," Johnny continued. "August of '63. The one where the pig got loose." A startled ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Tim stared at him, astonished. "You remember that?" Johnny nodded slowly. "I remember it," he said, "because it was one of the worst nights I ever had during the first year of that show." The audience listened carefully as Johnny continued. "The material we'd prepared wasn't working," he explained. "Nothing was landing. I was terrified. The network had been hinting all week that maybe they had the wrong host." Johnny rested his hands on the desk again, remembering the moment clearly. "I was sitting there thinking this might be the last year I ever host this show," he said. "That they were going to replace me, and maybe they'd be right." He looked back at Tim Conway. "But then I stopped thinking about the network. I stopped worrying about the ratings. I just did the bit the way I wanted to do it." Johnny smiled faintly at the memory. And the audience laughed. He paused. And for the first time all week, I remembered why I wanted to do this job. Johnny's voice softened. "I went home that night and called my brother," he said. "And I told him, I think I can actually do this." "That was the night I stopped thinking about quitting," Johnny said quietly. The silence inside the studio grew even heavier. "I was trying to save my own life that night, Tim, and without either of us knowing it, we were saving each other." For a moment, nobody moved. Then somewhere in the middle of the audience, a woman began to cry. Not quietly, but openly. The sound seemed to unlock something in the room. Within seconds, the emotion spread outward like ripples in water, touching every corner of the studio. Ed McMahon had one hand pressed over his eyes. Several camera operators made no attempt to hide their tears. And Tim Conway, the man who had spent 2 decades making the world laugh, who built his entire career on the idea that nothing should ever be taken too seriously, sat across from Johnny Carson with tears running freely down his face. He didn't try to stop them. Johnny slowly turned toward the camera. 22 million people, he said softly. That's how many people watch this show every night. He paused. And every single night I remind myself of the same thing. You never know who's watching. You never know who's out there in that audience, or what they needed to hear tonight. Johnny looked back at Tim. Now I know that at least once, 15 years ago, I did. What Tim Conway did next surprised everyone in the studio. He reached into his jacket and gently placed the crumpled yellow paper onto Johnny's desk. "I want you to have that," Tim said. Johnny stared at the paper without touching it. "What is it?" "It's the bit," Tim replied, "the state fair story." Tim explained that the morning after that night in 1963, he had written down everything he could remember from Johnny's monologue, the jokes, the images, even the small details. "I kept it in my desk drawer for 15 years, he said quietly. Johnny looked down at the paper again. "I don't remember it well enough to have written it down myself," he admitted. "I know," Tim said gently. "That's why I kept it, so at least one of us would." Johnny finally picked up the paper. He held it carefully, as if it were something both fragile and incredibly heavy at the same time. After a moment, he folded it neatly and placed it inside the inner pocket of his jacket. "I'll keep it there," Johnny said. Tim nodded. "That's exactly where it belongs." That night, The Tonight Show ran 17 minutes longer than scheduled. NBC received no complaints. By 11:50 p.m., before the broadcast had even finished airing on the East Coast, the network's switchboard was already flooded with calls. By midnight, every phone line in the building was busy. And by 6 the next morning, the calls were still coming in. They weren't just from fans of Tim Conway or Johnny Carson. They came from people across the country who had their own version of that August night in 1963. People who had once been alone in a dark room and found their way back because of something small, unexpected, and impossible to predict. In the 48 hours after the broadcast, crisis hotlines across the country reported a noticeable rise in calls. 2 days after the broadcast, Tim Conway arrived at rehearsal for the Carol Burnett show. The producers noticed something about him immediately. They couldn't quite explain it, but something had changed. Harvey Korman, Tim's closest friend on the show and the man famous for breaking into laughter during Tim's sketches, pulled him aside before rehearsal began. Harvey placed his hands on Tim's shoulders and looked at him carefully. "I saw the broadcast," Harvey said. Tim nodded. "I know." Harvey studied his face for a moment. "Are you all right?" Tim paused before answering. Then he gave a small, honest smile. "I think so," he said. "For the first time in a long time, I think so." Johnny Carson kept the crumpled yellow piece of paper. For the next 3 weeks, he carried it in the inside pocket of his jacket wherever he went. Eventually, his wife noticed the folded paper he kept checking and asked him about it. Johnny told her the entire story. She listened quietly without interrupting. When he finished, she sat silently for a moment before speaking. "So you saved each other," she said. Johnny nodded slowly, without even knowing it. "That's usually how it works," she replied. After those 3 weeks, Johnny moved the paper from his jacket pocket into a small wooden box in his home office. It was the place where he kept things that mattered deeply to him, things that weren't meant for public display or professional recognition. Inside that box were a few private treasures, a photograph, a letter, and a carefully folded sheet of paper. On that paper was the outline of a comedy bit about a state fair, written down by a young comedian the morning after it had unknowingly saved his life. Tim Conway went on to win 4 Emmy Awards and spent more than 3 decades continuing to make audiences laugh. In interviews, he was almost always asked the same questions about his chemistry with Harvey Korman, about the famous sketches where Harvey couldn't stop laughing, about the physical comedy that had become Tim's signature style. Tim answered those questions with warmth and humility, often making himself the punchline of his own stories. But he rarely spoke publicly about March 7th, 1978. In 2009, during a quiet interview with a small publication, a reporter asked him a different question. What was the most important moment of his entire career? The reporter expected Tim to mention the Carol Burnett show, or McHale's Navy, or one of his Emmy wins. Instead, Tim paused thoughtfully. "There was a night in 1978, he said slowly, when I told the truth on television." He looked down for a moment before continuing. "Everything before that night, I was performing. Everything after it, I was real." Tim smiled softly. "That's the most important thing that ever happened to me professionally, and it had nothing to do with being funny." He paused again. "It had everything to do with being honest." Johnny Carson retired from The Tonight Show in 1992 after 30 years behind the desk. Tributes poured in from everywhere. Presidents, celebrities, journalists, and countless ordinary viewers who had grown up watching him every night before bed. Most of those tributes focused on the empire he had built, the show, the format, the influence he left on late-night television. But during a quiet interview a few months after his retirement, a reporter asked Johnny a different question. What was the single most important broadcast of his entire career? Johnny didn't hesitate. "March 7th, 1978, he said. "Tim Conway came on the show and told the truth." Johnny paused before finishing the thought. "And the truth turned out to be something millions of people understood, even if they had never said it out loud." He smiled gently. "I spent 30 years trying to make people laugh," Johnny said. "But that night, we did something bigger than laughter. That's the whole job," Johnny Carson once said, "to remind people they're not alone." And in the end, that may have been the truest description of what happened that night. Tim Conway passed away on May 14, 2019, at the age of 85. Tributes poured in from comedians, actors, and fans around the world. People who had grown up laughing at the quiet genius of a man who could turn the smallest gesture into unforgettable comedy. But one tribute drew particular attention. It came from a short statement released by Johnny Carson's estate. It was quiet, brief, and perfectly in line with the man who had built a career on saying the most meaningful things with very few words. The statement read, "In 1963, Tim Conway laughed at something Johnny Carson did on television. In 1978, he came back to say thank you. For 60 years, the world laughed with Tim Conway. Tonight, we are grateful that he stayed." Years later, when Tim Conway's family went through his personal belongings, they discovered something unexpected on his desk. It wasn't an Emmy Award. It wasn't a photograph or a framed certificate from one of the shows that had made him famous. Instead, there was a single framed piece of paper. It was a printout of a Tonight Show broadcast date, March 7th, 1978. Below it, written in Tim Conway's own handwriting, were 3 simple words: "I stayed, thank you." If this story moved you, take a moment before you leave this video. Think about the person in your life who makes you laugh when nothing else can, the one who shows up on your hardest days without even realizing how much it matters. Sometimes people change our lives without ever knowing it. You don't need a television studio or a national audience to say thank you. Sometimes all it takes are a few honest words. So if someone in your life has been that light for you, let them know. And if this story meant something to you, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.